Imagine the United States walking into the same room week after week carrying a fresh IOU. IOU simply means I owe you. It is a written promise. Lend me money today and I will pay you back later with interest. A Treasury bond is the government's formal version of that promise. On the wall, almost $40 trillion already owed. China used to sit close to the front. Japan still does. But both reported smaller Treasury positions in June. And yet, the auctioneer did not go home empty-handed. The bonds sold. So the real mystery is not, will anyone buy? It is, who takes the next seat? And what price does America have to pay to keep the room full? Start where the next bond is actually sold. Treasury offers an IOU. Buyers write down the interest rate they require. In bond language, that rate is called the yield. If enough acceptable bids arrive, the auction clears. The bonds are sold. The recent August auctions cleared. The room was not empty, but the longest bond required a yield a little above 5%. That yield is the price of borrowing. In plain English, it is what the government must pay before enough buyers raise their hands. So a covered auction is not automatically good news. Demand can exist while the bill gets worse. Demand is a price, not a loyalty contest. Now meet the two faces that dominate the headlines. China's President Xi Jinping and Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. They give us country context. They are not the people sitting at Treasury auctions and placing personal bids. The actual holdings are reported through governments, central banks, funds, custodians, and other institutions. China and Japan both reported smaller Treasury holdings in June. That is real. But the country table is a month-end photograph, not a movie of every purchase and sale. It can also show where a security is being stored for someone else, not the final investor behind it. One famous chair becoming smaller does not tell us who took every bond that moved. There is another important clue. Total foreign holdings were still higher than a year earlier. China and Japan are less dominant. Foreign demand did not simply vanish. To find the replacement, stop looking for one flag and pull the camera back. There is no new China waiting in the hallway. The replacement is a network. Investors outside the United States, banks, dealers, funds, pensions, insurers, and accounts grouped inside the Federal Reserve's household category. They do not buy for the same reason. A dealer may hold bonds temporarily. A pension may need long-duration assets. A bank may need liquidity. A fund may be matching a benchmark. An overseas institution may need dollar reserves or collateral. And that household label needs care. It is partly a catch-all bucket for accounts that do not fit neatly somewhere else. It is not a census of ordinary families buying bonds from the kitchen table. One bond, many jobs, many balance sheets. That is how the room can stay full, even while the name cards change. The Federal Reserve belongs in the picture, but it is not buying the same thing for the same reason. Today, Fed Chair Kevin Warsh is the public face at the top of the central bank. But the job matters more than the face. Banks keep special balances at the Fed, so everyday payments can clear. Those balances are called reserves. Recent Fed buying was concentrated in short-term Treasury bills to manage those reserves. That is different from a broad emergency-style bond buying program, and it does not prove demand for a long bond. A bill can mature within a year. A long bond can remain outstanding for decades. Seeing the Fed manage reserves with bills does not mean it rescued every Treasury auction. Same building, different door, different job. If we mix those roles, routine plumbing starts to look like emergency financing. Now follow one bond out of the auction room. Government debt does not reset all at once. Each old bond has a repayment date. When that date arrives, the bond matures, and Treasury may replace it with a new one. When a low-rate bond reaches the end of the conveyor and a higher-rate bond takes its place, the government's average interest cost rises a little more. The dangerous part is not one dramatic midnight deadline. It is repetition. Through July, net interest consumed about $15 of every 100 Washington spent. In the same fiscal window, that was already more than national defense. Higher interest widens the deficit. The deficit requires more bonds. More bonds return to the auction room looking for the next buyer. The room, the price board, and the budget are one loop. 1 week auction would not prove collapse. 1 month of foreign selling would not prove it either. The warning becomes serious when several things persist together. Comparable auctions repeatedly weaken. Foreign and domestic buyers retreat at the same time. Dealers are forced to absorb more supply while trading gets harder. Fewer willing buyers, wider price swings. Treasury must lean more heavily on short-term borrowing just to keep the conveyor moving. That would mean a higher yield is no longer recruiting the network smoothly. Until that cluster appears, the honest signal is the price buyers demand, not a headline claiming that every buyer disappeared. Here is the verdict. Treasury demand still exists. China and Japan are less dominant in the reported data. The replacement is a network, not a country. And that network is asking the United States to pay more. This is not a debt collapse forecast. It is a map of how pressure travels. The next useful question is not who owns America. It is, what price will the next buyer demand? Market Pulse follows that price as each new auction clears. The playlist is on screen now.